Hello, salam, shalom, namaste, sat sri akal, aloha, hola, ciao, bonjour, buna, and privyet. I'm so happy you are joining us today because guess what? We have a very special guest with us today, and it's my friend, Neil Rosen, who is a motivational life coach. And I'm so happy to have you back uh, doing another episode with us, Neil. Welcome.
Thank you. I love your greetings. And it's so good to be back.
Yes, yes. Oh, okay. So Neil, for those people who might have missed our previous episodes together, can you tell us more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a motivational life coach. Prior to that, I was a educator for 32 and a half years as a school counselor and school psychologist. And so what I do now is that I try to help people reach their personal goals or business goals. I think a lot of times people just need that extra push because of I think their fears, anxieties, um, maybe internal dialogue with themselves, with their negative self-talk. So I try to help people get over that so they can successfully achieve their goals.
Yeah, that is so cool. That is so cool. Ah, and you know, the cool thing about our conversation that you're going to be having today is that normally, most of the time, I reach out to people. I'm like, hey, you do this amazing work, and I'd love to interview you on this topic or that topic. And in this case, well, Neil and I, of course, have done interviews before, but in this case, Neil reached out to me because, recently I have been publishing a number of episodes where I've had women um, who are experts in relationships, relationship coaches, and so forth. And we've been talking about different relationship issues. Um, and of course, because all those interviews were with women, we were very much giving women's perspectives on those issues. And Neil was listening to some of those episodes. He was like, hey, I want to share a male's perspective. I think that's a fabulous idea. Thank you for bringing this up to my attention, and I am really looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. So the last speaker I heard was Dr. Marie Kovanen. Did I
Uh-huh,
pronounce her last
uh-huh.
name right?
Yeah, I call her Dr.
Yeah,
Mari.
and I know she was a licensed psychologist and a dating coach.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I just wanted to give a male's perspective. I agreed with a lot of things that she was talking about, but
What are some of the things that
I,
you heard her say that struck you?
well, she talked about this intoxication in love, and sometimes we put blinders on because these emotions take over us, and sometimes we don't see some maybe red flags that normally we would notice. But since we have this emotional, I guess, the strong emotion that she called an intoxication, um, I think it sometimes blinds us of, the person that we're dating.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, we were talking about, experiencing the emotional cocktail, as it were, where, you do sort of like get caught up in strong emotions and feelings and that because, our emotions are such a strong driver of our behavior that it can be a little bit challenging to maintain perspective on a lot of things that we may otherwise find important. I mean, for example, I remember one of the issues that, or examples that, might have come up in our conversation was lifestyle. Like to think about if you're serious about being in a relationship with someone in the long term, it's important that you make sure that your lifestyles are compatible. Whereas uh, in this kind of context of, oh, you're feeling in love and, you're experiencing all these strong emotions, and you might just sort of not choose not to think about it or forget to think about, are our lifestyles compatible, for example. So that, if I'm remembering correctly, that was one of the contexts within which we were talking about strong emotions and forgetting perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I want to talk about, and I don't even know who to give this credit to. I'm sure it's a psychologist or a therapist, but this person mentioned the three C's.
Uh-huh.
And the three C's are communication, open communication, the
Mm-hmm.
ability to compromise, and commitment.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
I think these
Comprehension.
these three C's are important if you're going to have a strong, healthy relationship with somebody.
Yes.
And there's another love coach. I'm going to give her credit. This is Amy Nobel, and she's the founder of Love and Conscious Dating, and she's another love coach, I guess. And she came up with this. I really like this concept. She calls it the 3-4 rule dating. So there's
Uh,
four key principles that you should know by the end of the third date.
mm-hmm.
Do you have chemistry with this person? Is there like a physical attraction? Do you
Uh-huh.
have common core values? Is there emotional maturity with the person that you're dating? And is
Uh-huh.
there a readiness? Because a lot of times I think people might have the chemistry and they
Yeah.
may have some of the same core values, but
Yeah.
the other two are the important ones, I think. The emotional maturity and are you ready to be in a serious relationship?
Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Tell me more. I think Dr. Mari and I were talking about that as well. Yeah. So what's your perspective on like what's the problem that people deal with when it comes to these let's talk about emotional maturity. When you think about emotional maturity and how why it's so important to a relationship, like what's a problem that you see people struggling with?
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. Hope you're getting value out of it. For your information, this episode has been sponsored by the Happiness 101 program. Are you a change maker, coach, trainer, or healer? Are chains of fear holding you back from making the impact and income you desire? Using a unique combination of positive psychology and the spiritual wisdom of our most effective change makers, the Happiness 101 program helps you break through your limiting beliefs and manifest the abundance and success you desire with fun and ease. Interested? Book a free Happiness 101 exploration call with me, your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Just use my online calendar link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Well, are people being authentic? Are they being themselves?
Mm.
Are they capable of holding down a job?
Oh,
Do they have friendships? What are their friends like? What are their family dynamics like? Do they get along with their family partners or family members?
yeah,
So that's what I would consider the emotional maturity
yeah.
because, and sometimes, I've heard from friends and so forth, from males and females, that people are putting on a facade. It's
Mhm.
not who they really are.
Yes.
And, a lot of times I think, and I remember in my 20s or even in high school, for some reason, I always felt like I needed to be doing something on weekends. I needed to either go on a date or go with a group of friends and do something.
Mm.
And I don't know, I guess maybe at that time I had social anxiety, but I wasn't even aware of it because I
Mm.
didn't like really being alone. But, now being married after 34 blessed years, and my wife's listening to this. No, but I'm comfortable with myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes my wife goes, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the movies." "Who are you going with?" "I'm going by myself." She goes, "Really?" "Yeah, really. I'm going by myself," because sometimes I find it's easier just to go with myself than try to ask friends, and then you got to wait until they return your phone call or text to see if they're available. And, and I just find it easier sometimes if there's a movie I really want to see, I'll go see it myself.
Yeah. 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 You know, when you were mentioning emotional maturity and the examples that you give of like issues that can come up in terms of emotional maturity, it made me think about, wow, like a lot of things came up for me in the context, especially like when I think about like comparing my Indian-Pakistani culture and comparing that to the American dominant culture. There is like significant differences in terms of what counts as emotional maturity and what the expectations are. So, for example, in my Indian-Pakistani culture, most of us, we have a certain level of competence, even as little kids, in dealing with other people, especially other family members, because, our culture, especially if you're leading a traditional lifestyle, which my family did, certainly when I lived in India and Pakistan, we were in a joint family system. So, you're always surrounded by aunts, uncles, grandparents, lots of cousins, not to mention friends
Right.
and, more extended family that doesn't live with you. Um, and so, even as a child, you're constantly getting coached by your elders on how to behave and treat other people, especially family members, so that, we can all continue to live together in relative harmony and peacefulness, because it's not otherwise easy, like to live with so many people that you have that that know everything about you and who feel like they have a right to speak and have opinions on your life and everything that you do. I mean, it takes major social skills to be in that kind of environment and make it work, and so that is something that I feel like I have had a lot of advantage growing up in a traditional Indian Pakistani context the first 18 years of my life. But interestingly, like one of the things that I find in America when I moved here, um, and it's like this interesting contradiction I find, where on the one hand, because in America there's a lot more focus on individualism, and usually, families, either people are living by themselves, or even if they're living with their families, they tend to be in smaller units. So there's um, just a lot more sense of freedom in terms of what you can do with your life and having to answer to fewer people. Like for example, once I moved here, it was time for me to go to college. Um, I didn't have to answer to like 10 different people about what major I was going to choose and what career I was going to have, or if I was even going to have a career or go to college or not. Um, I just had to work with my parents. on all of that. And it made me feel like, oh, life is so much simpler. And then once I was in college, I found so much independence and so much encouragement to like in the environment to like start thinking for myself and form my own opinions and see myself as a leader. And it just seemed like such a standard part of American culture, and so I've definitely become more opinionated, more assertive, more confident, like as an individual, and a lot more open also, because the other aspect of our Indian-Pakistani culture, as I experienced it, was that we were taught that we had to keep quiet about a lot of things that we didn't like because it would cause disruption in the family and, like create unnecessary conflicts. But here, it's like I found actually people like a lot of encouragement to express my opinions, even about things that I was unhappy about. So, when I see Americans struggling with authenticity, not being able to express themselves, um, or feeling like they have to put on a facade, at first I found it surprising, Um, yeah, and maybe I'll just pause there and let you respond.
I was just going to say, based on what you were sharing about your
Yeah.
Pakistani family, is that I don't know if you ever saw the movie. I think there's going to be a new one coming out about the Greek wedding. It's a
Uh,
comedy, and the
oh, my
dynamics.
big fat Greek wedding.
Right.
Yes, I've seen that one.
There's going to be a third one because I think the father passes away, and his
Oh,
last wish is for the family to go back to Greece where he was brought up. And the dynamics, I think, are very similar to what you were describing,
mm,
that you got cousins, nephews,
yeah,
your grandparents living with you,
yeah,
or they're close by and they know everything that's going
yeah.
on. Or it's kind of like I don't know if you ever watched that Everyone Loves Raymond. You
No,
ever
no,
watch
that
that
one I
show?
haven't seen. No.
Well, Ray Romano, he's married and he has 3 young kids, and he has a older brother that's a police officer, and his
Uh-huh.
parents live next door, and they're always coming over, and the mother is always giving advice.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So, so I was thinking that the dynamics, of the Greek wedding and the Ray
Yeah.
Romano and I Love Raymond is very similar to what you were describing.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So like when you think about your friends and family and the people that you coach struggling with emotional maturity and like authenticity issues, like what's the root cause from your perspective for that and what do we do about it?
I think, like I was saying before, I think you got to be yourself. You can't pretend to be something else, because I know the people now in their 20s and 30s, I think, are doing this online dating. And
Um,
then they put a profile themselves and describe, their interests, what they like, what they're
yeah,
good at, what their job is or career
yeah,
or occupation is. And from what I've heard from my friends and just people sometimes at work, is
yeah.
that people kind of stretch the truth, or
Uh-huh.
they maybe show a picture of themselves on their profile like maybe 5 or 10 years younger than what
Mhm.
they actually are now. And
Mm,
so, I think that's not being honest when you're meeting this person for the first time. It's like,
yeah,
you're not the picture I saw online.
yeah,
And I thought,
yeah.
I want to share this, and I don't even have my daughter's permission, but I don't even think she would be upset with this, is that my daughter did online dating, and the last gentleman she met, she actually married.
Mm,
And I think this was before COVID or during COVID. I don't know. They just had a lot of conflicts because of work and so forth. They were just talking all the time, texting and chatting on Zoom some type of social media. They didn't actually meet each other in person for a month,
Ah,
but they were kind of like good friends by that time because
yeah,
they learned a lot about each other.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things about conflict is that on the one hand, it's obviously not pleasant, and a lot of people are not good at handling or dealing with conflict. I know I have major conflict avoidance tendencies, like especially in my younger days. I was extremely conflict avoidant because, I didn't have emotional maturity. I was like very emotionally fragile and I couldn't handle even small conflicts. I couldn't. So, and my best strategy was to just run away from any kind of emotional upheaval or conflict that I perceived coming my way. Um, but the thing is that as you mature and you grow in your capacity to deal with conflicts, it actually can strengthen your relationships and help relationships heal in ways that's not possible until you go through the conflict. Um, I know, for example, I remember um, this one conversation with my aunt is coming up particularly in my mind. This was like a few years ago, and it was the first time my aunt found out that I was a survivor of child sexual abuse. And the person who sexually abused me is actually a member of my extended family. And so this was the first time my aunt was finding out about this. And obviously it brought up a lot of emotions for her. And, you know, like for me, because, I've now been on a 30 plus year journey of healing from that trauma. So I was like doing okay in terms of, like my emotional management and so forth. Um, but, it brought up like some strong, like, you see, what was actually happening, to give a little bit more context, is that until like just a few years ago, I had never talked in public about the fact that I was a survivor of child sexual abuse. And I was at a point in my life where I felt it was extremely important for me to begin to speak up publicly about my experiences so as to educate and help with prevention of child abuse, particularly like child sexual abuse, because in my experience, one of the biggest reasons child abuse continues to exist and that we are not able to take better preventive action around it is that there's so much silence. Like people are not willing to talk. Many survivors don't feel empowered to talk. They're not at a stage in their healing where they can talk, and the friends and family don't want to talk, and oftentimes will explicitly, like I was explicitly told by those people in my family who knew that you must not talk about it. And so you carry this burden of, having to be silent and keeping this secret. And it like really, it's like a huge burden to carry. And it's,
Oh yeah, especially for a child.
yes, exactly. And so, like for me, I got to a point like a few years ago where I was like, no, I have to start to speak out. And it's not just about me. Like this is something I need to do to educate and help take preventive actions for our society as a whole. And so my aunt was very concerned about what that would mean for our family, and particularly the person who who abused me and how their reputation and et cetera, might be affected and this and that. So we had like, and so you can imagine like I got very passionate and heated about my perspective on the issue, and she had her perspective. And eventually the good thing is we worked through what we needed to work through, and she understood my perspective. I understood her perspective, and you know, uh, we worked through it. And the thing was that we had to sort of go through that conflict. I remember feeling like such a sense of relief, uh, um, having had that conversation, as tough as it was. I felt such a huge relief and a sense of like just like ah, because like once I got through that conversation with her, then it became easier for me to get through it with other family members, and just, and then just speaking out in public after I dealt with the issue with my family felt also so much easier. And
Well, that empowers you.
yeah.
Before you probably felt guilt and maybe blame, and the family felt shame.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's like so many, so it was not just me feeling guilty. There's like so many members of my family when they found out, they were like, oh my God, how could we have let this happen? Because remember, I'm coming from like a joint family system, and we're like supposed to be so close and all of that. And so
Right.
for a lot of my family members, they were like really shocked that this could have happened, in our own home, and someone that we loved and trusted and continue to like to this day. Uh, you know, um, this person, he has status and a certain position in the family and so forth. So anyway, the point that I was trying to make is that conflict can actually, like once you learn to engage in it in a constructive, healthy way, it's actually really helpful for relationships in some ways, and in some ways it's really necessary um, to improve the health and strength of a relationship.
Right. Well, I think, every relationship, good or bad, you learn from it. It's a learning experience.
Yeah,
So I wanted to talk, I read this article,
yeah,
and it talks about the 5 rules for dating that if you want to have a serious relationship.
uh-huh,
And I thought this was really good. So number
yeah,
one, I think this applies to male and female. Number one, be clear about your objectives. What is it that you want, and what is it that you're looking for in a partner?
mm,
2, are you looking in the right places?
mm, mm-hmm,
Going to bars and stuff, in my opinion, is not the right place. There you're probably looking for a one night stand. Be honest with your intentions. What are your true intentions? Are you looking for a serious relationship? Are you just looking for someone just to have, or a rebound type thing?
mm-hmm,
Number 4, search for common ground with that person. So that again goes back to the core values, and if you're
yeah,
ready to be in a serious relationship, and
yeah,
is that person also emotionally mature? And then
yeah,
this last one I think is really important, is take your time.
mm-hmm,
When I was dating, I would get into relationships too quick. And I think
mm-hmm.
I scared some of my dates off because
Oh,
I would get too intense. And
uh-huh,
I know one that, I liked her very much, and she has the same name as my wife, Sherry. And she wasn't, this last one, she wasn't ready for a serious relationship. She was focusing more on her career.
hmm,
And I think those dynamics have changed now too,
yeah,
for males and females, is that the male was once, in the 60s, or how I was brought up, the male took care of the female, he was the breadwinner and so forth. Well, things are totally different now. I mean,
yeah,
females, the last time I looked at percentages, there's more females going to college now than males.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And females are catching up on the salary scale. That glass, what do they call that? The
Ceiling, the
glass
glass ceiling.
ceiling. Yeah,
Yeah.
the glass ceiling is starting to disappear. That women are getting, the same salaries as men now. So they don't depend on man financially. Women are looking for now someone who complements them, or someone who can support their goals, and accept them for who they are.
Yes. So that's a really important issue, I think. Also, like especially again, sorry, I keep going back to my Indian-Pakistani culture, but that's where I come from. So, when we think about gender roles, again, in Indian-Pakistani culture, again, if you're leading a traditional lifestyle, which most of my family was, and continues to do, like you were saying, Neil, it was very similar where the man is the breadwinner, the woman stays home, but things are starting to change. And in like my generation and actually the generation after me, wow, there, uh, I actually have nieces and nephews now who are old enough that they're getting married and into relationships themselves. Things are changing. Like even those of my family that are still back in India and Pakistan, things are changing. The dynamics are changing. And a lot of the change, as you were saying, for us also is coming from the women. So how does that sort of like again, because I would love for you to share from a male's perspective, like if a woman is in this space where she's like, okay, I want a career and I want to balance my career with different aspects of my life, and I want a partner who will help me and support me in those goals. What are the challenges that come up for the men who want to date or be in serious relationships with these women, and how do you recommend that they deal with it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think before you get in a serious relationship, you gotta be comfortable with yourself and love
Yeah.
yourself, because I think a lot of time people go into relationships and they're trying to find someone who's going to make them happy.
Mm.
And if you're not happy with yourself, how do you expect to find happiness with someone else? I mean, happiness has to come internally. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people aren't happy with themselves and they try to find someone to fill that gap. And I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think the man has to be comfortable with having possibly a woman make more money than they do,
Mm.
and be able to accept that. I think, you know, I've heard conversations with some of my friends, they joke about it, oh, she makes more money than you, or you're going to be a stay-at-home dad and things like that. So, you got to feel comfortable with that as a man. And I don't know, things are changing, in relationships and on the rules. And I think we need role models. And I don't know if those role models are out there yet because of the changes in the dynamics of relationships. On TV, like when I was growing up, our role models were like the Brady Bunch, My Three Sons. I'm dating myself, but that's what I saw on TV, and that's what I thought were family dynamics, and
Mm.
what I saw in my family or with
Yeah.
my relatives, my aunts, and uncles and cousins.
Yeah.
And that's what I base what I know, or what you see in the movie theater. And a lot of
Mhm.
times what you see in the movie theater is delusional. It's not true. It's a fantasy. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes you know people look for that type of relationship based on what they see in movies, and it's not out there. It's not true. And I think they get disgruntled, upset, frustrated because they're looking for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah. So if because from what I understand, can like when I think about, why men might struggle with, um, let's say something like having their female partner um, working and possibly making more money than they do. It's because for so many like millennia, men have been raised with this idea that their value comes from their being the breadwinner, from their being, the providers of the family. And now this role is being taken away from them, or it's not that it's, yeah, that it might be not needed, that they may not need to fulfill that role because they have a partner who is equally financially um, competent and independent and so forth. And so I imagine that then you have to find some other purpose to your life, some other way to give meaning to why you're going to work and what work you're going to do and so on and so forth. Um, so what are you seeing? Like, so you mentioned you're not seeing a lot of great role models in terms of how,
I don't think the role models are out there on how to deal with these new dynamics of
what about,
having a
how would you
of
do?
having a woman who's financially secure, who really doesn't need a man for the financial reasons,
Mm-hmm.
or a woman that's making more than a man. I don't think we have those role models out there on television or even in our own families
Yeah.
to show us what that looks like.
Hmm. So how would you deal with a situation like that? How would you create new meaning for you if you were in that kind of a situation?
Well, that's why I was saying before, you got to feel comfortable with yourself.
Mm,
If you're comfortable with
yeah.
yourself, I think you're more easily able to deal with a woman who's financially secure, who really doesn't need you for her finances,
Mhm,
but she's
mhm.
looking for someone who's going to support her in her goals, someone who could emotionally comfort her.
Yeah.
You have very common core values on,
Yeah.
on family. You know, what I'm seeing, and even in my own marriage, is that people are waiting longer.
Mm.
No, I didn't get married. We didn't get married until we were 29. My
Uh-huh.
parents got married, I think, like they were 20 or 21. I know my mother-in-law, she got married at 18.
Oh, yes.
A lot of people got married like right after high school, or they married their high school sweetheart. and
Yes.
and things are changing now. Like a good friend of mine who I've known for over 30 years, we played tennis together. Now we're playing pickleball together. Um, Unfortunately, he got divorced and he's in a relationship now, and he's with a woman who was married, and she's widowed. She lost her husband um, because of illness. I think he had a heart attack. And, I asked him, why don't you ask her to marry you and stuff? And she doesn't want to be married. She's kind of
Mm.
like financially sad, and she's set in her ways. She's kind of happy just dating and having her freedom and independence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the same friend that I'm talking about, his son, I just went to his son's wedding. He knew his girlfriend from work. They were friends, and then they started a relationship, and they were living together. They knew each other for 9 years before they got married.
Mm.
And I'm starting to think that's the new norm, is that
Yeah.
young people in their 20s and stuff are waiting until they're more secure in their occupation. Especially now in California too, with the prices to buy a home, they're outrageous.
Yeah.
Young people today, I don't know how they're going to afford to buy a home in California. I think they're going to have to go to another state. because the prices are so high.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe they're waiting to get more settled in their careers, but maybe it's also like an issue of of you're in a relationship, not married, but you're in a relationship, and being in that relationship is how you're learning how to be in a relationship. That's how you are growing more emotionally mature, especially in the context of how to be in a relationship. Because I mean, I think that's what I was saying is like where I find like a lot of um advantage in the kind of cultural context that I grew up in, where, because we lived, as I said, in such big families and like so close with so many people, we were constantly getting trained in how to be in relationships, how to create relationships, how to maintain relationships. But in America, there's so much focus on becoming financially independent, on becoming technically competent in terms of whatever work you're going to do and so on and so forth. But where is the education and training uh, when it comes to like social intelligence? How are kids in America um, developing social intelligence? Where are they getting to practice these social intelligence skills? Um,
Well,
and
supposedly through dating.
right. And you see, I mean, this is my whole point is that when you're dating, if you're dating as a teenager, what are the stats of, teen dating violence? It's like a huge problem because here are these kids, they're like, again, you're in a cultural context in America where teen dating is normal. But these teens they have like have they already they're still figuring themselves out. They're still figuring out relationships, how to be in relationships. Many of them might not have very good models in their own homes, or a lot of experience in their own homes, dealing with different kinds of people. Because like um, uh, if you're like in a small family, how much variety are you going to experience in the family of different types of personalities and, like different kinds of like issues that come up. You'll be familiar with what you see in your family, but your family unit is so small that your experience is still limited. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Whereas, so it's like when you start getting into relationships and then suddenly there's all kinds of different dynamics at play because it's like even with the experience that you have in your family relationships, when you start to engage in a romantic relationship, there are additional dynamics that you have never had to deal with in the context of family relationships. I remember in my
Well,
family,
I think that's why you have these dating coaches now
yes,
because adults never learn those skills.
yes, and there's no one to really teach you because like in our culture, people did get married young too. But you continue to live with your family. And so again, you were in a context where you were constantly getting coached by the elders around you and how to be in a relationship with your now new partner in life, you know? And there's this whole process of the young couple being trained into how to be a couple and not
Yep.
just be a couple, but to integrate into their new larger families as well. So, but in America, a lot of those structures are missing, and so
I agree with you,
yeah, yeah,
especially single parents. A lot of
yeah.
times there's no father figure, so a young man has no role model unless he has a uncle or someone else in the family dynamics to take his place.
Hmm. Yeah. So for sure, I think that's one of the reasons why maybe it might even be a good thing that young people now are taking longer before they get into marriage, because they need to figure things out. Because it's like with marriage, I find like I would all I my perspective is that it's a very sacred tradition or an institution that we have, and it should be taken very, very seriously. And um, it's like in my culture, like for example, in America, here in the American Indian Pakistani community, one of the things that I'm seeing our people struggle with, especially those who are new first generation immigrants, and then they have children over here who are growing up. I see them really struggling with um, like their kids want the freedom to, just date and figure out who they want to be with through dating. But, first generation Indian Pakistani immigrants um, are coming from a culture where dating is not acceptable. Dating is not really allowed. And so when they see their kids uh, falling in love, the first thing the parents think of is, let's get them married so that they can be in a lawful relationship with each other as,
Or don't
we
they go in groups? I got the impression, maybe I'm wrong, from what I've seen on movies and so forth, is that in your culture, dating is more like a group thing.
so depending on who you're talking to, different people will give you different perspectives, right? But right now I'm trying to, like, from a traditional perspective, dating, whether you're talking group or individual, like just two people, dating is not okay. Dating is not okay. Like, you cannot be just in a relationship with no firm commitment or intention around marriage. It's not okay. Like, traditionally, if you're going to meet with someone, different arrangements can be made so you can meet with them, but it has to be with that clear intention
Intention.
that you're meeting that person to evaluate them for the purposes of marriage. So, um, and in that context, yes, you might go out, like the young couple might get, or the potential couple might get sent out with a bunch of, their friends or cousins, um, so that they can have some space to talk away from the adults. But not all adults will even allow that for their children. I mean, if you're really traditional and strict, they will insist that no, you meet in the home, or you meet where the family is present, and then you may be allowed to sit in a corner away from, but still within sight of the adults. So there are all these things going on,
So you have like
which
a chaperone.
yes, yes, you need to have. So there are those expectations, and then it's like once you're married, you're not left alone to just figure things out by yourself. As I was saying before, the expectation and the practice is that even after you're married, you continue to be, you're just integrating with a larger new, like, two families have come together now. And so now you not, it's not just about the couple getting together, it's about the families getting together. And so everyone's kind of learning how to integrate with each other. And the adults take the lead in terms of, I mean, by the adults, I mean the elders in the family take the lead in coaching you um, how to make this integration as smooth as possible. So, um, yeah, you can get married young, but you still have all of this support, and you're enveloped within this structure and this context where, you're in training to be in a good relationship. You learn over time. So for our teens in America, there's so much teen dating violence that happens because who's teaching
They have
them?
poor
How
role
are they?
models.
Yeah, and even for if like the people in their 20s and who are like dating and stuff, it's a similar problem where it's like, how do they get to learn? They just have to struggle through relationships that they form and learn through that struggle. So,
Yeah. So I want to share this. I read this in a Man's magazine that what makes a man feel connected to a woman
mm,
is hugs, kisses, smiles, offers of gratitude, praise, and words of affection.
okay, okay.
And then also it talked about what men want most in a relationship, and I think this applies to the woman as well, is that they want commitment and fidelity. But the word for fidelity, they use the words being faithful, loyal, and trustworthy.
Okay, that makes sense. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I wanted to bring this up on first dates because I've talked to some of my friends and they're telling me these stories on their first dates that drives them nuts. And it was from this article too. And I go, oh my God, this is exactly what some of my friends were telling me, is that on first dates, people are just too negative and they
Mm,
complain about their personal problems and their past relationships. And if you do that on a first date, I don't think you're going to have a second date, especially talking about your, personal problems that you're facing now and, talking about past relationships that just didn't work out. I know, I
yeah.
just don't think that's really appropriate to do on a first date.
So it's interesting. It makes me think of a question because, we have talked earlier about the idea of being authentic and being honest in how you represent yourself to the person that you want to date or that you are dating. So how do you create that balance or draw that line between like, so now so say you're on a first date and then you're like, okay, well, I have to be authentic, I have to be honest, but then there's also expectations of don't talk about this or don't talk about that in terms of things that may be on my mind. Um, so where is the guiding principle in how I determine um, what's appropriate to share at what point? While remaining authentic.
I think you got to give the relationship time to develop.
Mm,
I think maybe probably a couple months before I would share maybe, personal, maybe financial problems that you have or, past relationships that, especially I guess if it's a divorce and you're dealing with a spouse about, dealing with a child that you share, something like that. I think I would wait a couple months until the relationship had an opportunity to build or to develop.
uh, um, but just playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, it's like if you wait for like let's say a couple of months, um, might it not be too late? Because like for example, let's say if you have some serious financial problems and you wait for a couple of months, what like the person on the other side like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with this person's financial problems. Like maybe if they knew more beforehand, more upfront, they could make a more informed decision about, or if you have like a emotional trauma that you're still dealing with from a past relationship, but you don't, because it's going to affect your current relationship, but you don't talk about it up front or at least give someone a heads up, then 2 months in and then the emotional you start to tell them about, oh, I still have this emotional trauma, and this is how like it's still affecting me, and then maybe it's like
Well,
at the
that's what I think it's
oh,
appropriate then at that time, a couple months down the road, if they're at that point where the relationship, I guess, is getting more physical and the person doesn't feel comfortable because of their traumatic experiences, I think this would be a time to explain why you have these hesitations or why you're tightening up. I think this is the perfect opportunity to explain why you're acting this way.
hmm,
So the other person understands, where you're coming from, that it's not personally them. It's stuff that you're, still trying to deal with.
hmm. Yeah, no, because the example that sort of like came to my mind was, um,
Because I
yeah,
don't want to interrupt you,
I,
but I just want to get, because I'm just thinking about
yeah,
this. I have a friend
yeah,
now who's in a relationship, and I keep on asking him, why are you still in this relationship? I don't get it. I think it's just out of comfort because his I, his girlfriend can't hold a job. She's always getting fired. He's always helping her, like doing a resume or a cover letter because she's not that electronically capable. Um, she's had financial problems. He helped her out once and he told her that, I can't afford to do this all the time to help you out financially. You're going to have to ask your brother, or maybe you need to go back and live with your brother.
hmm,
So that's another thing where about red flags. And to me, that's a red flag,
yeah,
that if a good friend of yours is saying, why are you with this person? If they have so many financial and personal problems, why are you still with this person?
yeah. Well, that's what I mean, Neil, that maybe this is like one of those cultural differences popping up in our perspective there. So for example, in my culture, again, from a traditional perspective, like when you start to evaluate someone for the purposes of marriage, um, because we're not going to date, right? Like we're when we start, we're as I mentioned before that if we are going to meet with someone, it's with the intention of, am I going to marry this person? Is this person a good person for me to get married to? We want to know upfront, like what all the problems are, or potential problems are. Like, you actually investigate each other's families, your background, your history, and you want to know what the downsides potentially are, and if you're willing to deal with them. Like people want to know, like, what is the financial situation of this person? Do we want to deal with with those consequences? We want to know if there's like history of disease or illness or something, and then you be like, and then you make a decision as a family or as an individual about, do I want to deal with that? And so we want to know upfront, like where the problems are. In fact, there's a very strong, um, like in general, we are taught in our community, in our culture, the ethic is that in general, you don't reveal your family's issues and problems to people who are outside of the family. It's like a big no-no. It's like, if there's a problem someone's dealing with, like as family, it's your responsibility and your duty to support them and help them the best you can deal with that problem. And it's also your responsibility and your duty to not be telling everyone else and the world in general about what your family member is struggling with, because you don't want to have other people outside of the family, saying or thinking bad things about them and this and that. But the one exception is when there's a marriage alliance being made, or when there's an investigation, the families will initiate uh, for the purpose of evaluating whether a marriage should take place or not. That's the one situation within which we are told, if you know something about this person that might negatively impact um, the person that, the relationship that, is being considered, you need to be honest and share about that. So for example, I'll give you an example. Um, one of my cousins was getting married, and as Muslims, we're not allowed to drink or do any kind of drugs. And so because we are a practicing Muslim family, we were very upfront and clear, that we said, we are a practicing Muslim family, and in our family, we do not consider it okay for people to consume alcohol, or do any other kind of drugs. And so we have this expectation that whoever marries into our family, the boy, he's clean in that way, that he doesn't do drugs or drink alcohol. And there were like so many proposals that were brought to our attention that we had to reject on because they didn't meet this one criteria. But how do we know whether the boy drinks or does drugs or not? Because these things, especially in India and Pakistan, like no family will ever say it, like, in general, like that, oh, my boy drinks, especially if they're like Muslim family, right? They're going to hide that. They're not going to talk
Right.
about it. But when there's a marriage thing going on, investigation going on, then that's the time for people to be upfront and be honest and be like, no, my boy drinks, you know? And so we have this approach and this expectation that, we want to know what the problems are up front.
That makes sense.
Uh, yeah. So no,
So
it's yeah,
I wanted to talk real briefly, because I don't
yeah,
know how much time we have, but about some of the red flags to look out for.
sure, sure.
So one is if the person makes you feel bad about yourself,
Mm, yes,
if they're second guessing their feelings towards you,
yeah.
if they don't listen to you, if they don't support your goals, if they
Mm,
pressure you to get physical before you're ready.
yeah,
Relationships are all about them.
yeah.
This is a key one. They don't get along with your friends and family. To me,
Mm,
that's a big red flag. Negative feedback from friends, like I was telling you, what I was asking my friend.
yeah.
Um, you never meet their friends or family,
Mm,
and the person's like calling you crazy all the time. Like if you think that the person's cheating on you, you just brush it off and say, "Oh, you're crazy. It's all in your mind."
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I agree with those. Those are all really important red flags to be aware of. I think the one red flag that made me think about context is important is, your friends and family having issues with your potential choice. Because immediately one of the contexts that popped up in my mind was racism, for example. Like, um, like or classism. Like in my okay, let me stick to um, examples of in my Indian Pakistani culture. Um, in India and Pakistan, classism is a huge issue. Like people are very class conscious. How much money you have, what your class status is. These are These are huge issues. People are very, very conscious. And as times have been changing, I think for the better. The younger generations, we are becoming less class conscious, or at least we are trying to create more equity, and be less driven by class consciousness in the decisions that we make, uh, uh, especially in the context of relationships, where historically, traditionally, the expectation was, for example, in the context of marriage, that you would marry into a family that was your equal. Or the exception was the woman could marry up, but a man must never marry down, because the man had to maintain the status, you see. And so
Yes.
when a woman marries up, she assumes his status, but if a man marries down, he loses his status. And that was not considered acceptable. So either you marry equal or the woman marries up. But, nowadays, the younger people are challenging those notions. And, um, you know, um, they're trying to create positive change from my perspective around these things. And when they do, they meet a lot of resistance from their families. Um, and then it becomes like a real issue of, like social justice and moral standing. Like, what moral stance are you going to take when your family is opposing your choice of partner, and the basic reason, they have no better reason for making that opposition other than class consciousness, and and being discriminating in this classist way, you know. And so if from a moral perspective you are taking a stance against this kind of classist thinking, and your family is opposing you, well then, I mean, you have to, of course, make your decision how far you're willing to stick to your stance and how far you want to go in terms of, taking the opposition of your family. But, that's one context I immediately thought of, where maybe you're facing opposition, but it's okay because you're taking a moral stance.
Yep. Well, this is a very complex topic that we brought up today.
Yeah. Oh my,
Relationships.
indeed, indeed.
So I wanted to end with this
Yeah.
one thing this post I saw on Facebook. So it says choice, chance, and change. So it says you must take a choice to take a chance if you want anything in life to change. I,
Ah,
and I think that applies to relationships, is that you gotta put yourself out there and you gotta have a positive attitude in order to try to find your partner.
yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that. And thank you so much, Neil. We always, whenever we're talking, we lose track of time. And you're right. It is time for us to wrap up for now, for sure. But thank you again so much for taking the time to be with me today, and having this chat.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yes. And so I will just end with a reminder to all of our listeners to check the show notes, because we will share Neil's links in there so you can connect with him, and learn more and get more support from him as a motivational life coach whenever you need it and whenever you're ready for it. So until we connect next time, I wish you lots and lots of peace and joy.